Great. Good morning, everybody. So I have the honor of introducing Andrew Wynn-Williams, who's the Divisional Vice President for CME. And so CME stands for the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. So Andrew is responsible for CME British Columbia's strategic vision, managing relations with members and advocating on behalf of their interests. He's also responsible for liaison with the government and other stakeholders, such as the Coalition of Industry Groups and other economic developers. Andrew.
Thank you. Okay, well, that was loud. Thanks very much for everyone for having me here, and thanks to Trish for inviting me. How many of you, this is your first post-COVID conference? Yeah. And how many of you forgot your business cards? Yeah, so it's that's kind of funny. So this is actually my second conference. My first conference was earlier this week in Manitoba. So Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, we're Canada's oldest and largest industry association, been around for about 150 years. And everything we do kind of fits into two boxes. Box A is we represent the industry, the government, and the public. That means I'm a lobbyist. And box B is there's a suite of programs and services that we provide to our members to try and help them become better manufacturers. That includes a fairly comprehensive training program in lean manufacturing best practices, and our lean institute is based in Manitoba, and so we just had our lean conference, which we do every 3 years. It's Canada's largest lean training conference, and so I just came from Winnipeg, and I drove in last night. And so, you're at the end of the 3-day conference, and it was funny for me being at the end of this 3-day conference, and the last speaker was this one from Calgary, and she was Michelle Cederberg, and she was really, it was one of those, speakers to amp you up and get you excited at the end of the conference, because let's face it, these conferences are kind of training. Yeah, you have your social events, but you're thinking all the time, and then even your social events, you're meeting people, and you're always on, and so you get to the last day, and it's pretty draining. So having your last speaker be this like really exciting person kind of was really excellent. I thought, that's good. I thought, that's excellent. So I wonder who Trish's got as the last speaker. And then I looked and went, oh. So here I am at the end of a 3-day conference, knowing full well that I'm the last thing between you and golf, and I've got a bunch of data-heavy slides. So let me apologize. Now I'm looking to see how many of you sat close to the edges of the room so you can kind of sneak out without me noticing. So anyway, I'll try not to be too dull. And then just one last thing before I get started is, as you may have noticed from the tie, I'm a big fan of West Coast Indigenous art. And this is a Coast Salish piece, and so it would be pretty hypocritical of me not to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples, and that it's kind of an honor to be in a group that to share land with a group that has a culture that can still produce something like this after hundreds of years of hardship. And so huge respect. And if you like West Coast Indigenous art and it's something you're interested in, the Museum of Anthropology at UBC is awesome. So if you get a chance, if you're spending an extra few days here or a weekend, then my advice is to go there. All right, so presentation summary. So it's hard to get a bunch of data slides without actually providing some context, so I'm going to start off providing a bit of context so you kind of get a sense of what the structure of the BC manufacturing industry is like. Then I'm going to give you kind of the overview, the data piece. That's going to be the bit where you're going to see a lot of charts and slides. Then I'm going to talk a bit about some of the challenges we're facing. Some of them you will see are very similar to what James talked about. And yes, he was right on most of it. It's just expanded to the whole industry, not the food space. I'm going to talk about a few solutions that we're recommending to government, because as I said, I'm a lobbyist. And then there's the one slide at the end, which is 3 things that I think you should take away from this conference that will help you in your business as you go forward. I suppose, given that I'm between you and golf, I could just skip to the last slide. But, I've got to build some trust here. So we'll start with that. So when we start looking at manufacturing in BC, we're looking at I see 3 success drivers that we see anecdotally, and you'll see this in the data, and that is things that reduce the impact of the cost of labor and reduce the impact of the other high costs that we face as a manufacturer. So the first is proximity to the resource industries, or the proximity to the land base. So that includes food and beverage, obviously, but it's also mining and forestry, and you'll see that in the data. So that's one, is where for some reason being close to the land base helps. That's both in terms of we supply it. So Tycrop Propel makes equipment for fracking. Rimex makes the giant wheels for mining trucks, that kind of thing. And then, of course, the wood products industry itself and the mineral products and that kind of thing. So that's one, proximity. The second thing is automation. This is an opportunity, which means that it's a problem, right? So yeah, this can help you overcome those issues, the high cost issues, but we don't invest anywhere near enough in this. James touched on that, and I will too, and I'll talk about the kinds of things that we're worried about, but that's one other. And so then, of course, you have the overlap, right? I want to think of it as a Venn diagram. And I said there's three, and the third is innovation. And so what does that look like? And people, when you talk about innovation, people immediately go to technology. But it's not so much just technology. We look at sort of niche or specialty products, things that tend to be high value and low volume. They're often protected by IP, and they often require some kind of specific or special expertise. So what are a couple of good examples? Stem cell technologies is going to be probably one of British Columbia's largest manufacturers in a very short period of time. They're growing at 20% per year. They have essentially set the standard for the goop you use to grow stem cells in. And so as stem cells become your go-to regenerative bedside medicine, they're building a 3,000 human facility in Burnaby. So that's one good example. But it's not just technology, that's pretty high tech. Someone like Rimex, I talked about the wheels of mining trucks. For them, innovation was they invented a locking ring so that instead of having to jack up your giant mining truck and undo 60 bolts and take half a day spending 4 tires, they can just have a locking ring. They can unsnap the ring, you take the ring off, you can take the tire off the truck without having to take the wheel off the truck. So that's innovation, that's not technology, right? One more, because I know that we talked about the food industry. Anybody heard of a company called FPS? So Food Processing Services, Food Processing Solutions, FPS Inc., based in Richmond, didn't exist in 2010. Did not exist wasn't even founded. They are now about a $350 million a year company with 4 facilities in Richmond, subsidiaries in Charlottetown and New Zealand and China and Brazil, and service centers in Europe. And they have freezing systems where they made hygiene king, used cutting edge technology to make hygiene king. And so they are in huge demand. So there we go. There's a few products for you to think about as the kind of things that have success in BC. And like, think of those freezing systems, high value, low volume, protected by IP. All right, so now we start to dive into some of the data. Now I've set that context for you. You look at the number of establishments. There's 13,000 manufacturing facilities in BC, about $62 billion in sales. It's about 6.3% of GDP. Pay more. And then there's investment intentions of close to $2 billion, which is not bad. I think that one of the challenges that we run into is when you look at the average weekly earnings, then you look at the cost of living in BC. So even though we pay more than most, it's still a problem. That's still a barrier for us to getting people to work for us. So, and you don't need to write all this stuff down because Trish has the slides and I'm sure she'll send them all to you. Not that I noticed anybody was actually writing it down. You stop writing. No. So GDP trends. Now we're going to start talking about a few trends. So obviously COVID hit us a bit there, and then it's starting to grow back up again. So we're slightly below the 2019 high for 2021, but we're close. When I talk to my members these days, they're having record years. So I think 2022 is going to be really high as well. I think that's going to continue going up. Sales are big, margins are shrinking. So that's just something to think about in terms of what we're looking at with GDP here. What's the impact of the sector? This is a really cool slide because I think it shows how many spin-offs there are, so that's a ton of jobs. So anyway, that's just a quick spin-off piece. And then here's the outlook. So you can see, again, COVID hit us pretty hard. But don't forget, this is rebound growth, this 4.2. So it's going 4.2% is actually not 4.2% of this, it's 4.2% of this, right? So you already had the dip. So we're not back up to where we were, but we're gonna get there. Judging by this, you notice it trails off a bit. We're still a little bit better than the rest of Canada in terms of the projected growth, but when you look at it, it's not going to be as strong. Right now we're quite strong compared to the rest of Canada, but that's going to change a bit. We're projecting a difference for two reasons. One is we have bigger markets in China, and China's going to have an economic slowdown. And the other is Ontario really dominates, and we're expecting them to have a pretty good year because they've invested a lot in EV production, electric vehicles, and so we think that's going to pay off for them in terms of their future growth. Okay, so here's top manufacturing industries. When we start to look at it, we can see, as you see, wood products are right at the top, and they've been there for forever. Food has been catching up pretty steadily, and then beverage and tobacco is right behind that. So when we look at that, you actually often see food and beverage combined, like in James Association. You can actually see that food and beverage is now taken over when you combine them from the wood products industry. Machinery, primary metal, so that's tech and Alcan, right? Paper products, chemical products, fabricated metals. So that would be a lot of the fabricated metal stuff. That's all your sort of metal forming shops, metal banging shops who will supply to a lot of the machinery manufacturers or to technology manufacturers, that kind of thing. Transportation equipment, and then the non-metallic minerals. So when you start to look at the change last year and the growth in them, you can see wood really rebounded well as the US picked up. Food did not grow quite as quickly. Beverage and tobacco, 30%, so massive growth in that space. Some of the other ones are down, and then you actually, when you go to the next piece, you can actually see that over the 5 years, it remains beverage and tobacco that is really kind of the growth piece for us. And so you saw James's slide, and you're probably thinking, okay, so what was in that beverage category? Craft beer, distilleries. Anyone had Sheringham Gin from Near Souk? Won the world's best gin. Sheringham Seaside Gin. So there's another BC product for you to look at. But you'd be wrong if you were thinking it was craft beer and excellent gin. And you're looking at why is our beverage and tobacco industry growing so quickly. That legalization has had quite an impact on the manufacturing sector. When you look at some of the biggest, fastest growing companies in sort of the beverage and tobacco space, this is where they all are. And they're all becoming hugely corporate, right? So.
Now tobacco?
No, yeah.
Like, where does it fall? Is it in the beverage category?
I think it falls in I think they put it in the tobacco category. Yeah. It's kind of a tobacco variant, I guess. What do they used to call it? Wacky tobacco. We've come a long way since that 1930s movie Reefer Madness. If no one's ever seen that, it's pretty funny. All right, so manufacturing sales in British Columbia, they are booming. I touched on this. A lot of our members had record sales. It's the margins that are the issue. So people want stuff. the lead times are growing, the costs are growing. And when you look at the growth in manufacturing sales last year, again, we were ahead of most of the provinces. There's a bunch of reasons for this, but the big one is we're just better than the others. And then when you look over the past 5-year period, and you see that the biggest growth is PEI, but is there anyone here from PEI? Yeah, no. I'm figuring they opened a new fish and chip shop, and so there's more potatoes and more fish being manufactured. That could, you know what? That's now I really hope there's no one here from PEI. But if you look at that again, Saskatchewan is the big one, and I think that's potash is just kind of keeps going. And then Alberta, that was down for the longest time, but that reflects the rebound of the energy industries. And then, of course, us is again, we're really driven by wood products and by food. So when wood products go up, we go up. So manufactured good exports, again, when you look at those, it's 60% of our merchandise exports so manufactured products are about 60% of all of our merchandise exports. So it's, again, manufacturing is really important for BC. People tend not to think of BC as a manufacturing province, but we are. So manufacturing exports by province. This is measuring the increase, not the volume, because obviously if it was volume, then this one would be up here. Ontario has always got the volume on us, but in terms of growth, again, we're still continuing to grow. This is, it's kind of it's all good news until you start to look at the margins. And then, again, the PEI one, all those fish and potatoes. So again, you start to look at it province by province, and that's huge, right? Because that's a big drop in Canada's manufacturing, because Ontario is so dominant in terms of our manufacturing sector. All right, so now where are we going? So unlike the rest of Canada, where when you look at Canada as a whole, about 80% of our exports, slightly more, go south of the border. In British Columbia, we're a little more diverse in terms of where our markets are. But what's interesting is we worked really hard from, about the time that NAFTA came in. BC really focused on growing the Asian markets. And so it took us from the same 80% that everyone else was down to about, only about 60% of our stuff going to the US. But now you look at it, it's over the past 5 years, that's changed again. US is rebounding as our market, or more accurately, China is shrinking a bit as our market, just because the Chinese market is starting to produce a lot of stuff on its own. Great question. No idea. Yeah. So the thing is that's over 5 years, right? It's over a 5-year period. So I don't know how much of that is due to friction, and how much of it might be just other economic factors. The command and control nature of the Chinese economy means that it could be friction. If it was another economy, friction would be fringe. But with China's economy, it might be a factor, but I don't know how much of one. Well, you see, again, if it was 5 years, then I'd say, if it was 1 year, I'd say yes, it was supply chain, but it's 5 years. So I think it's more than just that. I think there's a number of different factors there. Because if you look at some of the other ones, because if it was just the supply chain, you look, the same Asian supply chain issues apply in Japan and Korea, and those both grew. You want supply chain, James was talking about transportation and stuff, and I'll get into supply chain more in a minute, but I had one of my members who, I don't know how much you know about what caused the supply chain challenges, but one of the big drivers was the port at Long Beach, the big container port there, got really backed up. So you couldn't get containers in and out there, so all the ships were waiting with all the containers on them. And so the Pacific Ocean became like a parking lot, so you couldn't get containers because they're all floating in the middle of the ocean. And I had one guy who found it became cheaper to put his container from Shanghai on a train, send it across Asia and Europe to Rotterdam, put it on a boat in Rotterdam, bring it over into Montreal, and then put it on a train again into Kamloops. And actually cheaper than bringing it across the Pacific Ocean. So the supply chain challenges are huge. All right, so in terms of the growth, I already pointed this out in the other slide. You can see that, as I pointed out, also Japan and South Korea have really grown. U.S. has grown. China has shrunk, and you see that reflected in the previous pieces that I had. The 5-year piece, again, reflects similar kind of measures. And as I said, all these slides are going to be available to you, so you can dive into them a little more deeply later. So now we're going into employment. You can see we had the dip that everyone else had because of COVID. We shrunk a little bit before that as well. But when you start to look at the growth now, we're getting really close to where we were a couple of years ago. Not as high as before the crash in 2008, but we are now pretty much as high as we've been since then. And then you look at this, the manufacturing employment by province. Again, the BC is pretty strong, not as strong as Newfoundland. And then the 5-year growth rate doesn't look as good as it for us. And again, that was reflected. You may have noticed in that other slide that I pointed out, we actually dropped before COVID, right? That was a soft market for us before COVID. Top 10 manufacturing employers, food. And again, this is why James really focused on the employment issue, because they have a large employment base. And it's a problem for all those industries. But because the food industry employs more per GDP or per piece, then it's a bigger issue for them. Average weekly earnings, we're a little bit above the national average. So this is compared to the national average, but we're 5% above the economy in general. So we're actually really strong in terms of how we compare to other people in other jobs. All right, I already touched on this briefly. This is done from a StatsCan survey, Business Outlook survey, and you look at this is now 80% are facing some difficulty or significant difficulty in capacity pressures. I've talked about long lead times, talked about finding supplies, talked about finding people. That's where it's reflected. People are really starting to feel the pressure. And then these are the obstacles I talked about: rising cost of inputs, transportation costs. Oh God, look how small the print is. I thought it looked big when I was looking at it on my computer, but it's not. So when you start to look at these obstacles, they're pretty common. They're the ones I'm not a surprise to any of you, but it's interesting to see the data on how prevalent they are for everyone. So that's just another key piece. And then this one was interesting. People wondering how long do they think that the supply chains are going to last. Here's your optimists. Three months. Yeah. Who was that? I think it's already been 3 months since the survey. And then 3 to 6 months, 6 to 12 months, 12 months or more, or unknown. So our chief economist, if you're interested, he told me, when I asked him October, how long is this going to last? This was before our floods. He said 1.5 years from then. So you're looking at probably 1.5 years from now.
So this is like from today, another year?
This was, if you look, this actually survey was 2022 Q2, right? So people are thinking 12 months from now. Like I said, that's what our economist thinks, roughly 12 months from now. So yeah, you're gonna start putting stuff in your coffee. Oh no, you're gonna want to go back to that slide I had with the leaf. Yes, that's to be relax you a little more. Other.
Just on that point, I was just in Germany and we had a corporate meeting there, and they were telling us extend to June next year. So it was pretty close to exactly. It wasn't great news. I mean, none of us were celebrating, but
All right. Yeah, you know how long it took me to get my Bosch dishwasher? And until it came, it was an Andrew dishwasher, so it was really important to get it. Other findings from the business conditions, and again, these are all pieces. 88% of manufacturers want to try and relocate supply chain activities to Canada. But that's a huge number. The problem is feasibility, right? All right, so now I'm going to shift gears from the supply chain challenges, start looking at GHGs. So as you know, Canada has to be, according to our international agreements, carbon neutral, net zero by 2050. So when you look at this and you think, well, that's not too bad considering that's the growth of GDP compared to our emissions. However, the drop is because of COVID, right? It's because our activity reduced during COVID. If you take that out, then it's been pretty flat. Flat isn't going to get us to net zero by 2050. And then when you look at this slide, that's when you really start to see how challenging that target is going to be. Super challenging. So net 25 megaton decrease per year. So that big drop you saw because of COVID, that was 16 megatons. So the challenge we're facing is significant, and the federal government is really working on it. So you're going to start to see some measures from them that may be useful to you. Remember I talked about my slide at the end with your 3 takeaways? So there we go. All right, so now I'm going to start talking about the challenges. Those were the kind of the issues that I wanted to touch on. There are more. James talked a lot about the cost of land. There's a lot of things driving the cost of land. One of the ones he didn't talk about is idiocy at the municipal regulatory level. I've got a member in Nanaimo. They have a piece of industrial property that is zoned for light industry that they want to expand on. They've been told, oh, you know what? It's got to be rezoned to medium industry for you to go there. They're light manufacturing. They make air compressors, right? So I'm like, okay, how long is it going to take to rezone from light to medium? Any guesses? 6 years. So guess where they're going to expand? Not in Nanaimo. So that kind of thing is also a problem. So anyway, here we go. This is, again, data. What it means is we are a high-cost environment. High cost of labor, high cost of land, high cost of materials, and unless we find ways to mitigate that, we are not going to get the investment that we need. And this is reflected in our data. If you look at us compared to other countries, our FDI is down. Our FDI is not good. And that is because there's other costs that we need to address that go beyond those. We cannot remain a high-cost, low-productivity environment. So manufacturing investment in BC, again, this kind of ties to that last slide. Expenditures are projected to be 13.8%, but they're below levels in years prior to the pandemic, which were already low. And when you look at investment in machinery and equipment in manufacturing in Canada, since the crash of 2008, the US has out-invested us something ridiculous like 8-to-1 on a per capita basis. If you look at us compared in terms of the resulting productivity gains that you get from that kind of investment, if you look at us compared to the rest of the G20, Italy trails us in productivity gains since the turn of the century. That's the only one.
Is it I guess, mentality of the Canadian manufacturers?
There's a bunch of different things, and I'll talk a bit about that when we get there. Great question, though. Manufacturing investment. So look, Mexico. You don't think of it. You don't sit here and think, oh yeah, Mexico is better at manufacturing than us. It's getting that way. So again, these are all huge warning signs in data. So, and now we're getting to technology. This is, again, the obvious reasons why it's important for us to invest in technology. And I go right back to that slide where I showed you the little automation slide. And I think of my members who are automated FYI doctors. Anyone ever seen the FYI doctors chain? They make eyeglasses. They're the last company that actually makes the glasses here in Canada. They bring in the lenses and the frames from the other things, and they grind the lenses themselves. They've got a really automated facility here in Delta. And so that's but anyone else is really highly automated? High-end resource pieces are, but a lot of the other manufacturers, our small and light manufacturing, is not. And so then there's a labor and skill shortage, and that's a massive challenge. That links to our automation piece. James already talked about that. For us, he talked about how they got a grant from the Supply Chain Resiliency Program to do a study on supply chain resiliency. We got a grant from the Supply Chain Resiliency Program because we said small and medium-sized manufacturers aren't really sure how to make that investment. There's fear around that, right? So if you look at a Maple Leaf Foods, if we're going to stick with the same examples, and Maple Leaf Foods is going to go and make an investment in technology, they've got a whole team to do that. If you have a smaller manufacturer, it's like the senior executive, right? Maybe as VP Ops who are going to try and make that decision. And they're like, oh, well, if we put the machine there or there, or how do we do that? You know, it's like, we've made a bunch of recommendations to government. It's things like more demonstration programs, so you can actually see this stuff in action. And what we got funded for the provincial government for us is we went, well, we can help those smaller manufacturers answer those questions. We can help them by say, okay, so if you want to make an investment in technology, but not quite sure what to do, or you look at your line, you go, I want this line to be moving faster. You can come to us, we'll send you a lean expert, and we'll spend 3 days with you and walk you through that challenge you're facing and determine ROI, or even if you can't get the exact ROI, you can at least get the cost-benefit analysis, do the root cause of your challenge you're facing, figure out the best place to put that machine, what you want that machine to do, that kind of thing, like actually really break it down so you can figure out the best way to make that investment. So we got the government to fund that, so it's totally free. So you can apply to us. So if you guys sell equipment to manufacturers, so if one of those manufacturers isn't quite sure, you can actually send them to us, and we'll actually put them through the analysis for free. And here's the thing. We've been running the program for a year, and do you know how many people have applied for it? 20. Right? It's just because people are so afraid of making that. And then there's also the capital investment piece, right? Our program is not tied to a capital grant. And so the people are still worried about making that capital investment. But here's the other piece. Another program the provincial government did as part of their recovery program is they did an accelerating advanced manufacturing grant. They had a $10 million program, and it went like that. So that tells me that light manufacturing and manufacturers in British Columbia, if they get the grant money, they're prepared to make that investment. And so we're really pushing the provincial government for that, and we're really pushing the federal government for that. Provincial government's looking at doing a manufacturing strategy in the spring or in the fall, a new industrial manufacturing strategy. They've been working on it for over a year now. I expect grant programs to be in that. All right, so we're starting to get down to the nitty-gritty here. Here are my recommendations to the provincial government. One, use government procurement better. They don't do a very good job of using government procurement to support industry. I'm not saying go out and buy everything from BC, but I'm saying at least give some sort of, tie some sort of benefit to it. I put this one in red because the important one that I talked about a lot during this program, investment support programs to drive tech tech investment. Youth and skilled trades, we're as an organization, we're really focusing on women in manufacturing, so trying to get young girls, middle school age, to tour through manufacturing facilities and see that they're not big and dirty and nasty, and try to keep them away from the cold rooms where they're peeling shrimp. Oh no, James isn't here anymore. I can't pick on him. In British Columbia, we have a PST, which is not a value-added tax. It's a nightmare, and it's a political third rail because they tried to change it to an HST in 2010, and it was an absolute disaster. So no one will touch it, but we're just trying to get them to actually just remove it more and more. There's a lot of stuff is exempt. We're just trying to get them to do more exemptions every year. Want a Made in BC program, and then we want more support for our resource industries. We tend to not pay enough attention to them, especially when you get down to the Lower Mainland and Victoria, where the population base is. They do not realize how much of our economy is based on those resource industries, and so there's all this sort of forestry's bad and mining's bad, and yeah, forestry's bad and mining's bad, but they pay for all your health care. So, where am I? Okay, so here's the slide. I told you there was one slide to go. The last slide that has the three takeaways. So, I talked about the net zero. Federal government's working really hard on net zero. They're going to be doing they do their economic update in September when they're kind of their mid-budget piece. There's going to be a big focus on net zero, and we're kind of going, so, you're going to support the purchase of, equipment, right? Or you're going to support, and they said, it's not a direct quote, but it's, we're going to support anything that will reduce GHGs. So if through your process control equipment, you can demonstrate that you're going to improve efficiencies and reduce carbon, then start to figure that out, because you might be able to access federal grant programs or have your clients access federal grant programs. So that's one. That's takeaway number one. Number two, labor supply shortage. Can you tie what you're supplying to manufacturers to their ability to reduce labor and the cost of labor? I know you probably sell based on efficiency and all that kind of stuff, but can you take that extra step and say, yeah, your efficiency means you will need X fewer people? And there's tons of examples. Primex. Primex is a company that makes those boxes that go on the side of your house that your cable comes into. So you've got a whole variety of those kinds of, and they got small ones and big ones for industrial complexes and stuff like that. They used to have people putting stuff in and out of their machinery. And now they actually have all that done by automation. They got an automated process to put stuff in and out of those. Improved productivity by 25%. Did not fire a single person. Right, so automation is not replacing people. It's reducing the cost of labor. So, and then last, I talked about this one also. The BC's industrial and manufacturing strategy is coming sometime in the fall, they tell me. And there will be grant money in that. So keep your eyes open for that and figure out how your clients can use their grant money to automate and improve their processes. So there you go. And if anybody wants their clients, if you think that your client would benefit from the technology assessment program, I forgot my business cards, but you can take a picture. So the technology assessment program, they essentially get $4,500 worth of consulting for free. So
Is that BC only? Or
that's BC only. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. So there we go. I'm done. And I see there's like food and stuff coming in the back of the room. So I don't even know how much time I took. Am I on time? Am I finished? Are there questions? Yeah, go ahead.